Hallo und welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm Manu and he's Stefan Biankowski. It's Monday after a crazy weekend. I spent most of it on a plane.
Is it? Are you sure it's Monday?
What a week, Stefan. Hey, Captain, it's Monday.
I don't think you know whether it's Pancake Tuesday or Sheffield Wednesday. I think that's the truth about
what
it.
time it is and where I am. I can tell you I spent the last 48 hours, I spent about 20 on a plane.
Yeah. I mean, I can give a bit of insight into. We've obviously got our group chat with all the contributors to Gegenpressing, and I was chatting through this week about who can do what shows. And this obviously tends to happen before you've even woken up because you're in the west coast of America and most of us are in the like European based. And I said, we'll make all these plans, but I don't even know what continent, city, state, country that Manu's in right now, and that tends to be the case most weekends. I'll get up on a Monday and I'm like, I don't know if he's in Germany, he's in America, he's in Canada, west coast, east coast, who knows. And I had no idea until you checked in this morning.
I'm actually home. In more context to that, last weekend, I was in Palm Desert in San Diego for the MLS Cup semifinal. And then, of course, the very last minute invite from the Whitecaps to fly with them to Miami. So Fort Lauderdale. I actually need to correct this. I didn't actually set Fort to Miami because the team that's called Miami doesn't even play in Miami. They play in Fort Lauderdale. And so, I spent a whirlwind 48 hours in southern Florida with the club, MLS Cup final. It feels like the entire world was at that game, Stefan.
Is Fort Lauderdale like, how in Europe you get these like Ryanair or EasyJet airports that claim that they're in the city, but they're not actually, like Düsseldorf, which is actually in the Netherlands, I believe. But, every year thousands of Brits fly there thinking they're flying straight to Düsseldorf.
Fort Lauderdale actually has two airports. The main one, though, does have, and I could see people getting that wrong because it's called the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood Airport. So imagine you land... Hollywood International is the name of the Fort Lauderdale airport. Can you imagine you're like flying to Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood International, thinking that's in California, and then you end up 4,500 kilometers away from where you want to go?
It's definitely happened before. I've seen all sorts of stuff. I remember seeing on Reddit last year a woman who flew to Austria thinking she was going to Australia, and then she obviously she steps out of the airport like in Vienna or something, realizing she wasn't in Sydney.
That's horrendous.
Yeah,
that's horrendous. Yeah,
but
Florida, what a place, though, man. I've been there a few times now. And there's this meme, if you haven't played that game yet, you can Google your name, you can Google your birth date in Florida, man, and it will come up with the craziest headlines. And, for anyone who's ever spent any time there, those headlines are all bang on. Like yesterday when we drove to the airport, our taxi was on the freeway going 120 miles an hour, right? There was a guy in an electric scooter on the left lane. Showing the middle finger to everyone who was going past him. That will be yesterday's Florida Man headline.
Yeah, Florida Man's a bit of an internet sensation, isn't he?
It's 100% true.
Yeah. How many Florida men were on the pitch for the MLS Cup final? That's the question.
I think Inter Miami were pretty much the Argentine national team, and the Whitecaps were mostly Canadians. So
fair enough. Well, I had a very different weekend from you. I had a Christmas night out on Saturday. And I was suffering from the cold, but luckily 7 or 8 pints of Guinness seemed to be the perfect medicine for it. Maybe I just needed some extra iron in my body, I think. Feeling a lot better for Monday. So, if you're feeling a bit rough, go get a pint of Guinness. Feeling fresh, feeling better after suffering from a cold all last week. And some interesting football, Manu, which we both actually missed because we're both doing stuff this weekend, but we both caught up now.
I did watch the Bayern game on the pool before the MLS Cup final. After I went for a run early and then just sat in the pool with a coffee and I watched the game from poolside. And I thought first of all, what is it? Kane with the fastest one of the fastest hat tricks in history. Not as fast, of course, as Lewandowski, who did score 5, but it was such a weird game, that Bayern game, because you look at the scoreline in the end, you're like, oh yeah, Bayern Munich trashed another opponent. But for a long time, it didn't feel like the game would end that way. It was far more balanced. And then, of course, Bayern scored a second, and then they scored a third, and then Stuttgart just gave up, right? And a red card to Asignon as well. But it was kind of weird how Stuttgart A just completely capitulated, and B how Bayern Munich with a really mixed lineup pretty much decided this game from the bench. Konrad Laimer, excellent again. Of course, the Stanisic gets a goal. A different backline too with Kim and Bischoff, right, in there as well. But yeah, that really stood out to me, that for a long time it felt like a game until all of a sudden it wasn't anymore, Stefan.
Yeah, I mean, I found this game to be quite a frustrating one from a Stuttgart point of view, to be perfectly honest with you. And that might seem like an obvious thing to say since they lost the game quite heavily, obviously 5-0 they ended up going. But as you said, that was very heavily weighted towards the end of the match. I did watch the first half, and I thought Stuttgart were okay. They'd certainly had their chances. Early on there was a handball call, which I think it was Bischoff, maybe Guerrero, I can't remember who it was, in the Bayern box, and Stuttgart obviously claiming a handball. I personally don't think it was a handball, but I've seen them given. And then, they had a goal ruled out for offside. So, they certainly had their chances in this game, but I definitely thought watching that first half, when it still was technically a balanced game, I thought Stuttgart's tactics were very naive. And this isn't something that's unique to Stuttgart. It's something that I've noticed that a lot of Bundesliga teams doing. And, to me, it's the greatest strength and the greatest weakness of the Bundesliga, that you have these clubs who, sit between maybe like 3rd and 8th in the table, especially at home when Bayern come to play them. And they do attack. They do decide, we're going to go man for man with Bayern and we're going to see what happens. And maybe it did quite well in previous seasons, but this free-scoring Bayern team has, so far this season, just picked just about every single one of them off. And the thing that I kept kind of watching and couldn't quite believe was the manner in which Stuttgart were just comfortable leaving, Wagnermann and Mittelstadt out on those wings on their own to deal with Olise and Diaz. Now, look, I know they're both good players, they're both internationals. Mittelstadt's obviously international for Germany and stuff. They're senior players. They play at the very highest level. But I was watching the manner in which they were both just so isolated out there, particularly Mittelstadt, who has to deal with Konrad Laimer bombing forward as well. And, at times Jamie Levlin helped, but actually for the first goal, Levlin just completely loses Konrad Laimer. A simple 1-2 into the Stuttgart box. And I was reminded of that game that Bayern played against PSG in Paris. And do you remember how much Upamecano would bust a gut to make sure he covered Konrad Laimer whenever Laimer was one-on-one with one of PSG's wingers? And I thought to myself, why is it that when Bayern play good teams, they have the know-how to be like, we can't leave our fullback one-on-one with a world-class winger. But when Stuttgart come up against Bayern, they look at Olise up against Mittelstadt or Diaz against Wagnermann and think, we'll figure it out. They'll figure it out. We'll try and make it work. It'll be fine. And it just, and that's why I'm talking about that kind of naivety from Stuttgart. And, they kind of bumbled through the first half. Like I said, they had a goal ruled out. They could have maybe had a penalty. Bayern weren't particularly great. But I just thought it was kind of like an accident waiting to happen, the way that they were kind of going one-on-one with Bayern across the pitch. Maybe that's because Kane wasn't on the pitch. Maybe that's because, Pavlovic wasn't on, or Leonard Carl, or maybe they thought it was a bit more of a kind of, physical over technical Bayern team because Guerrero and Goretzka were in midfield as opposed to kind of maybe more kind of playmaking players. But I thought it was, I don't know. this is where I'm kind of conflicted, because for me as a neutral who wants to see more of a title race, and that's not me specifically saying I want Bayern Munich to lose games every week, I just kind of want to see other teams really test them. And I think a way for a team like Stuttgart to test a Bayern is to, like, you double up on Michael Olise or you double up on Luis Diaz and you really make things difficult for these guys. And it just didn't really feel like Stuttgart did that. They played a high line. They just left them one-on-one with these guys on the wings, and eventually Bayern just completely broken down, especially when Harry Kane came on and he was able to kind of just play as that kind of focal point, if you will, up front, and could play these these through balls for guys like Olise and Diaz and stuff like that. And I don't know, it just felt to me like, Hona's just completely got his tactics wrong there from a Stuttgart point of view.
Yeah.
But Bayern ended up winning. If people look at that and think 5-0 and think, oh well, it's a whitewash, and to an extent maybe it was, but I thought Stuttgart could have done a lot better on the day. Really,
after the Stanisic goal, it definitely was. Before that, it was. I mean, the Kane goal the first one was incredible. So was Leimer's opening goal, really fantastic. The more I watch teams play Bayern Munich, if they try to go toe to toe with them, they usually get picked off, don't they? That's been the lesson, I think, for a lot of clubs. You look at the games where they had difficulties this season. Funny enough, Wien Wiesbaden, Augsburg, under now fired Sandro Wagner, Union Berlin twice, Arsenal. These were all teams that tried to be more destructive and pick them off in set pieces, and hurt Bayern, physically, and also most importantly matched them in the work rate, right? Which is an element that Company has added this season, on top of the possession game. The fact that he demands that all his players also outrun his opponents, which gives them such an incredible edge, and it's something that he started doing last year. But of course, it takes a year or so to implement the system, and I think it's hitting another level. And I think the lesson that I've seen from the teams that have gone and actually matched Bayern Munich on the field, they all matched them in intensity. Even with St. Pauli, right? Who did quite well against them. How did St. Pauli, hurt them? By going toe to toe with them and being physical, and most importantly, matching their pace on the field and running with them, like matching their running game. And that is very hard to do, because Bayern Munich don't have many injuries at the moment, and the two injured players that they do have, my key players, are about to come back. Davies is, essentially now week to week. Could be back any moment, and Musiala is the same thing. But watching them this year, I think if you want to hurt them and you're trying to play football with them, they'll happily accept that, right? And I think Stuttgart is a team that likes to play football, especially under Sepp Hoeneß. They like to have the ball. They like to circulate the ball. They like to play good football. They do it really well most of the time. And the problem, though, is that Bayern Munich is like, okay, well, if you want to circulate the ball and everything, we're just going to outpace and outmuscle you. And I think that was sort of the thing that I learned from this match. And then, of course, when they're in a situation where they're already up and then they can bring on a Kane from the bench, right? Then it's really hard, I think, for those teams. So I think there needs to be almost like a little bit of a paradigm shift for when you play Bayern Munich. I think where in the past you were happy to just concede possession to them and trying to hit them on the counter, I think it needs to kind of shift to, now we also need to outwork them, because otherwise we're not going to get anything. And we need to be clinical in our set pieces. We need to be clinical in our finishing. Otherwise, no chance. And I think there is a blueprint out there, and I think not enough teams have realized yet that it exists.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because I think if you watch the way that Bayern set up in this game, Company set up with a very kind of physical team. He had Goretzka in midfield with Guerrero, two runners. He had Jackson up front, who was primarily there to kind of stretch the line and to kind of make sure there's a lot of running around the pitch. And in the second half, he brings on far more kind of technical players. He brings Harry Kane on for Jackson. He brings on Lennart Carr for Guerrero. He brings on Pavlovic on for Goretzka. And all of a sudden, Bayern go from being this team who are happy to kind of go box to box to a team that just end up dominating. And they end up just kind of passing the ball around Stuttgart at that point because Stuttgart are tired. Stuttgart have been kind of chasing them around the pitch. But as you said, Bayern could match them physically. And I mean, two other things that really stood out to me in this game. One of them was I thought Konrad Laimer was outstanding, and I was watching the way that he kind of chooses to either make overlapping or underlapping runs to kind of complement Michael Oliseh's just a fantastic kind of duo that they have together alongside one another. You know, obviously Laimer scores a tremendous opening goal where plays basically a 1-2 with Oliseh. Oliseh's out wide, and then Oliseh kind of cuts it back to him. He just kind of like taps it in with a back heel. Beautiful goal. And, you know, but they both work so well together because Oliseh's a player who sometimes does like to run with the ball, but he's also sometimes a player who just wants to stand out on the line and kind of dictate play almost as a playmaker. And in those situations, he leaves so much space in the middle of the park for someone like Laimer to kind of attack. But then equally, Oliseh is also more than happy to kind of track back and chase down a fullback or chase down a winger if Konrad Laimer has made one of those runs. So I think they've got a great chemistry together. I think they work really, really well. They work really hard together as well. And obviously it's done tremendously well for Bayern this season. The one Bayern player who I didn't think did well at all in this game, Manu, was Alexander Nobel. It's definitely worth looking up the highlights of this game, but his fumble for the Stanisic goal was shocking. And he actually did it in the first half as well. I can't remember whose shot it was. I want to say Goretzka maybe. It went right through his hands as well. And lucky it went wide in that game. You can maybe say he could have done a bit better for Kane's goal from outside the box. And, you know, I was just watching the game and I was thinking, I remember not that long ago when I was kind of making the case for this guy to be the one that Manuel Neuer should be moving aside for. And there was so much kind of praise for him, and we were all kind of praising him for saying, you know what, I'm not going to sit on the bench at Bayern. I'm going to go out there and try and kind of forge my own career. But do you know what, Manu? I honestly am beginning to think this guy's actually beginning to go backwards at Stuttgart. I think his errors, I think his mistakes are getting more and more apparent. And I don't know if that's the kind of football that Stuttgart play. I don't know if he's more exposed from that back line or what. Maybe he's just getting complacent because, you know, there's just no one in that Stuttgart team are going to knock him off his peg. But I just think Alexander Nobel's going backwards in a really worrying manner this season. And it's something that he and Stuttgart are going to have to address because I don't think I can watch Stuttgart right now without watching him make at least one mistake a game. It's honestly that bad.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a reason why Stuttgart are planning for Dennis Simon goal right next year, right? The Paderborn shot stopper was currently out on loan from Stuttgart at Paderborn. 5 clean sheets already. I know the Zweite Bundesliga market value update is next week, and his increase is significant because he's been an incredible goalkeeper in the second division at 20 years, and Stuttgart have no interest whatsoever in making the Nübel deal from Bayern Munich permanent with that 10 million euro salary. I think Alexander Nübel's future is probably outside of the Bundesliga, to be honest with you. He's probably going to move on and go abroad. Some rumors about the Premier League and all that. But yeah, you know, having said that, I think Stuttgart the fact that Stuttgart have already did succession planning in hand, maybe that is also one of the problems here, that he doesn't know what his future is. But I'm with you. I think he's just never really fulfilled the promise that we had in him when he came out at Schalke. It's tough, right? Because he comes through at Schalke, and at very early on he looks similar to Manuel Neuer, but then we realized that he's just not quite there. He's good with his feet, you know, clubs like that, but the arrows are getting increasingly more. And, you know, you contrast that with like the young keepers that are now coming through. I've already mentioned Simon, Altobolu, who are big at Bayern Munich, right? Who gets another start there. That next generation is already there and playing on a regular basis. And so it's only going to be a matter of time until the shift is going to happen in the national team as well, where one of these young goalkeepers are gonna claim the spot in goal, right? So that is the situation that he finds himself in, and maybe that's tough, but he chose the career path to Bayern Munich at a point where Manuel Neuer was probably way too young to retire. And even now is probably at the stage where he could probably play one more season before he hands it over to Jonas Ulrich, right? So it's a tough situation to be in, because he doesn't have a place to go back to, and the club that he's at the moment has a successor with a higher ceiling than he has in place, right? So that's a difficult situation to be in.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think if you think about like where he is in his career right now, his parent club don't want him. The club he's on loan at have obviously made a decision that they don't want to keep him either, and he's kind of stuck in this limbo right now where he's not really at a club. No, none of the clubs he's attached to actually have any long-term plans to keep him. So I think he does kind of have to go away. Maybe, I mean, I think maybe even like an Augsburg or a Mainz or something like that, get his head down, and then just spend like 2 or 3 years just kind of proving that he's good enough at this level. Because look, I'm not entirely willing to completely blame him for all this, because, you know, Stuttgart have been wide open at times defensively, and, you know, goalkeepers are always the guys who end up having to pull the ball out the back of the net, but it's 9 out of 10 times it's not their fault when they make these mistakes. But there are some obvious, and it's the shot stopping that seems to be the real one for me. He can make some outstanding saves, but more often than not, he's kind of compensating for the ones he didn't make in any given game. So, that's a concern for me, but we'll see how he gets on. Maybe by the end of the season, he might be able to turn things around, but it's hard for me to see how Stuttgart can be like a kind of serious outfit at the Bundesliga this season when, you know, defensively they're still wide open, and, you know, Alexander Nobel is a perfect example of that.
Well, we'll see what his future brings. You know, a player who is going to have an incredibly bright future is Yan Diomande. Absolutely nobody saw this coming, which is why I interviewed him earlier this season.
The man. So I found out this weekend, Manu, through one of our listeners, that he actually went to high school in the US.
Did you not read my Transfermarkt article?
It's in your article, yes. I remember it well. I remember it well. Of course I do. And was there any opportunity of him to play for the US men's national team?
I spoke to him about this in the article. And it's still out there, you know, and it's an interesting story. He went to the US thinking that it would help his talent development. So he played for a high school in Florida, and then tried out for a bunch of MLS teams. Charlotte is one of them, and then none of them, Charlotte, Colorado, and a third. It's in my article, and none of them wanted him. So his agent was like, well, maybe the US isn't a good idea after all. And he went back, and then he signed for Leganes in La Liga 2. No, actually in La Liga. And then they got relegated, right? And he played there for a few games, and Leipzig spotted him. I think he was part of that talent school that Marcel Schäfer knew about in the US, because Marcel Schäfer, the sporting director, spent some time there, right? In Florida, and had an eye on him. And it's one of those stories where they signed him for 20 million euros plus bonuses, and you could immediately see from the first match day, I think, that he's extremely talented. He was already caught up to, when I interviewed him, part of the article was that we were able to break that he was nominated for the Ivory Coast national team, right? It's a good national team. It's not easy to get in, and he's 19 now, I think. He's just turned 19. So at a very young age. I love this player. I think the first time, you know, for when I did the research for the article, and I looked a little bit into him and then watched him play and then spoke to him as well. And it's a joy to talk to. His English obviously is very good from his time in the United States. And he's a very articulated young man who has strong opinions about things and speaks really well for himself. And shows an enormous amount of intelligence about how he goes about in his career. And his career path has been extremely unique, right? Going to a place where he realized that wasn't for him, and then making this decision to go to Spain of all places, right? That's not necessarily normal either. I think it shows that he's already seen quite a bit of the world. And on the field, I mean, he's so good, Stefan. I mean, he's dynamic, he's fast, he's great in one-on-one situations. He can put pressure on opponents' back line, constantly on the move. I think, for me personally, when people saw that Leipzig was going to pay 20 million euros for this guy that no one has ever heard of, there was a lot of raised eyebrows, but I would say the scouting department hit the jackpot here.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I mean, this Leipzig team is just kind of full of outstanding players. But no, he was absolutely great in this game. As were just about everyone in that Leipzig team. It felt to me, watching this game, particularly in the first half, like a team who are very good at attacking came up against a team who are very bad at defending. And that was apparent 4 minutes into the match when Konrad Harder just basically turned round, outran Robin Koch and headed home a really straightforward ball over the top. And I could sit here for about 15 minutes and probably intricately break down every mistake that Arthur Thiat and Robin Koch made in this game, but I won't, because I've already done that like 3 or 4 times this season. And I feel like I'm going mad because I can't watch Frankfurt without watching these two guys just make an absolute clown show of this team's defence. But regardless of that, I think they were directly responsible for at least 3 of the goals that they conceded against Leipzig. But focusing more on the positives, Diomande, outstanding. Nusa, great. I thought Baumgartner was outstanding again. I wrote a newsletter on him a few weeks ago, in fact, might have been last month, explaining his new role in this Leipzig team and how Werner's kind of managed to get him playing his best, and that was apparent. But the player that stood out to me was Konrad Harder, Manu. He's a player who's kind of had maybe a bit of a slow start at Leipzig. He was a player that they kind of picked up almost, I don't want to say on the fly in the summer, but it felt a bit like, like when you go shopping and you've done all your you're in the supermarket, you've picked up everything on the list, and then you get to like the cash till, and there's like a pack of crisps or chocolate or something. You're like, I'll just grab that. It felt a bit like Leipzig did that when they picked up Konrad Harder this summer, and I always thought he was really impressive in Portugal whenever I watched Sporting in the Champions League. I always thought he was a really powerful number 9. And I think he showed in this game what he's capable of, because that first goal, he comes short for the ball, lays it off, and then turns Robin Koch and just takes off. And then I think it's Baumgartner who just plays a ball over the top to him, and he just powers down on goal, heads it in. And in the second goal, breaks on the counter-attack after Frankfurt hit the crossbar, unfortunately. He runs down the pitch with the ball. Arthur Thiat completely turns off as he's looking at players over his shoulder, allowing Harder to kind of run into the goal, and then he lays the ball off to Baumgartner. And I think both those goals show what Harder's good at. He can be a penalty box player, he can score the goals, but he's also a guy that can run the lines. And throughout the match, Frankfurt defenders were just bouncing off him. The guy's obviously, he's stocky, he's built, he looks to me like an old-fashioned number 9 where, centre halves just struggled to kind of knock him over. And I thought he was the perfect kind of focal point for that Leipzig attack, and I thought they all played tremendously well. But I don't know, man, we're obviously looking at a Leipzig side here who continue to impress. We can talk about Frankfurt and their mistakes and how this result comes after only a draw against Wolfsburg and then that defeat in the Champions League, and seriously question where this team is actually going as we approach the January transfer window and whether they can actually turn things around. But Leipzig look on fire, and I know they still have their hiccups from time to time, but it looks like on the day they could probably beat anyone in the Bundesliga.
There was so many question marks about Ole Werner and whether he was the right choice for this club, and if he can work with young players. I think that is. If you had any doubts about that, just look at also who he brought on in this game, right? Samba Konate comes on, a 16-year-old striker from the academy for Yan Diomande in the 87th minute, but TDM Gomez comes on, right? Max Finkgräfe comes on, Maximovic comes on. He starts Nedeljkovic on the right from the beginning. The front line with Nusa, Harder and Diomande, all young players. I think if there's ever been any doubt on whether Ole Werner can work with young players, I think that's completely out of the window now, right? I think we can now say with some confidence that whatever the issues were at Werder Bremen with him not playing young players, it had nothing to do with young players, but rather with him trying to survive in the job. And, I think he's proving that. The sad thing is the hiccups, right? They were 29 points, already 8 points behind Bayern Munich. The game now, the first game that they lost to Bayern Munich looms large. The defeat to Hoffenheim looms large, right? Those are and we've seen this with all the teams following Bayern Munich. I don't know if it will make much of a difference because Bayern Munich are firing out of all the cylinders this year. But you just kind of wonder if these teams could have maybe kept the gap a little bit closer. Or maybe if they can still close the gap, we'll see. But, with the teams that are now behind Bayern Munich, I would say Leipzig are the one that is, if there is ever going to be a title challenge, which I don't think is going to happen this year, it will probably come from them.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking before the show about how there's that big kind of clash between Bayern and Leipzig. So I was going to say Leverkusen, but Leipzig is the right word. On the horizon in the new year, and regardless of where Leipzig can actually catch Bayern in the Bundesliga and where they can actually beat Bayern in the Bundesliga, because they still have to play them in Leipzig, if I'm not mistaken, or was that first game in Leipzig?
No, that's first game on January 17 is in Leipzig.
Right, okay, sorry, I'm thinking of the Pokal game. Sorry,
that's going to be back in Munich.
So they play at home. Yeah, they play Bayern. They play Bayern at home in the Bundesliga, and as you said, the 17th of January. Then they play them in the Pokal quarterfinals a few weeks after that, and it'll be interesting to see because we've been talking about this from the start of the season. I mean, we were all waiting to see if whether Werner was going to be able to kind of hit the ground running, whether he can kind of take on the job and kind of get this team kind of all singing from the same hymn sheet because Leipzig just hoovered up so many wonder kids. He's done that, aside from the odd hiccup. We just kind of have to wait and see whether A, they can keep that consistency, but also B, whether they can kind of knock some points off Bayern. And, you're right, Bayern do look unbeatable at the minute, but Bayern do have a relatively small squad. They are relatively reliant on key players, and I guess in the odd match like this one against Stuttgart the weekend there, they can bring in a Guerrero in midfield or stick Jackson up front, and obviously Bischoff's been doing a decent job at left back, but when they kind of get on that home straight around February-March time and they've got Champions League games and they have to really kind of prioritise who plays when, maybe injuries start to get pick up, that's when Leipzig can kind of take advantage of them. And it's interesting, they've kind of got two games relatively close to one another in that short period of time. So we'll see. We'll see what Leipzig can do. But, they look like a great team. But I guess the only thing is whether that kind of team of young players can obviously then go and do it against the Bayern. Because they haven't really had that experience. They're not playing in the Champions League. And as we saw at the start of the season, when they played Bayern, they did kind of look like rabbits stuck in the headlights. But we'll see what happens. But Manu, just briefly on Frankfurt before we move on. Frankfurt have now conceded more goals than any other team in the Bundesliga this season.
Yeah.
And it's getting pretty ridiculous. I was just checking there. They've conceded 29. They've scored 28, which is equivalent to how many goals Leverkusen have scored this season. So talk about the worst defence in the league and maybe like the fourth or fifth best attack in the league. I've seen this movie before, and it's all well and good scoring goals. I know we all think that's the most important thing in football, but this is a quote that's often attributed to Sir Alex Ferguson. I think it actually goes all the way back to a head coach in college football in America. But it's that title like attacks win games, but defenses win league titles. Or state championships, whatever it is. And I'm not saying that Frankfurt need a solid defence to win the Bundesliga, but I'm beginning to think they need a solid defence to keep Dino Topmüller in this job this season. And he's tried different things, and he maybe doesn't really have the options to kind of pick and choose who he can play. But I'm getting a bit worried about Frankfurt, I'll be honest. And I feel like if they don't fix that defence, heads might begin to roll in Frankfurt. Unless they can quickly do something in January, but it remains to be seen.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's also something that's something Dino Topmüller has come under heavily criticism now, right? To an extent where the media is now calling it the Frankfurt crisis. I think we're there. To be honest, the football hasn't been good, and there was so much hope, I think, ahead of the season that they could be, including by myself, saying that they could be one of those teams that could maybe be in that top 2, top 3 even, and it's just not happening. And that's partly because of the roster construction, right? I think that they didn't do enough work in defense, and I've mentioned this on the show before. They tried to get Itakura from Gladbach, and that failed, and then they didn't have another player lined up. But that shouldn't happen. And so, they find themselves in a situation now where they're in full crisis mode, right? And how do you fix it? You have to go out in January and fix it, and maybe also look at the head coach position and think, okay, maybe we have to make some changes there as well. Because this is a club that is far too ambitious to be where they're at the moment. And, even in the attack, like, they're now having Batshuayi and Wahi up there. Were absolutely pointless.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because we spent so much of like last season and just this year in general talking about that goalkeeping situation at Frankfurt. And it feels like, Topmüller's finally made that change, but he's still so wedded to this kind of centre-back partnership of Robin Koch and Arthur Thiat. And look, I know I give them grief every week, and I know it's not all their fault. Of course it's not, but it does feel like he's very reticent to consider changing things. He's sticking to his plan through thick and thin, and I guess we'll need to see. This is the season where he proves he isn't just a guy who had, Hugo Ekitike up front or Omar Marmoush and everything else kind of clicked, because it's very easy to put together a starting 11 when you got guys like that who are scoring like 20 or 30 goals a season up front and doing so from the halfway line and dribbling through teams and scoring goals almost individually like they did. He has to prove that Frankfurt can do this without these superstars, and they haven't really done that this season because, as far as I can tell, Topmüller's struggled to put together a coherent starting 11 from one match day to the next, and they keep dropping points, and it might lead to him losing his job if he can't come up with a solution sometime soon.
No, absolutely. Frankfurt also another one to keep an eye on in a negative way. They, of course, are playing Barcelona in the Champions League this week, so it's not getting easier. All right, the main event of this week was in Hamburg. The Nordderby is back. I did my newsletter on this week and was really looking forward to this game because we hadn't really had it in full fashion since 2018. Of course, they saw each other in the Zweite Bundesliga a few years back during COVID, with like the stadium half empty and no ultras. Stefan, it's really rare that games live up to expectations. I would say this one did. It had all the drama. It had the great goals. It had a last-minute late winner from Poulsen for Werder to make it 3-2. Vuskovic with an unbelievable goal. We work with a bunch of HSV fans because, of course, our Transfermarkt office is based in Hamburg. And we did. I do this 5 games to watch for every week around the world. Article for Transfermarkt, and the Nordderby was one that we featured. And Yannick Ringen said, he said, our one of the German team's writers, he said Luka Vuskovic is the transfer of the season in the Bundesliga. That was his opinion. He's a HSV fan. Have to add that. But I mean, after that goal, why are we going to argue with him about this? Vuskovic is unbelievable. I mean, what a player he is. Unfortunately, HSV don't own him, right? He's on loan from Tottenham and will probably go back. But he's doing so much for them defensively. He's a threat in the attack. He fully identifies with the team as well because of the story of his brother who's currently serving a doping ban at HSV as well, and Hamburg have gone out of the way to ensure that despite the doping ban, this is a very controversial ban that a lot of people feel she shouldn't be serving in the first place. HSV have gone out of their way to protect this player and to protect the family. And, Luka Vuskovic, I think one of the reasons why he opted to go to Hamburg was because of that. And he has been an incredible signing. But, Fabio Vieri, great signing. In our chat, we discussed where HSV's goals going to come from. And I said, well, look, they have done actually quite a bit. Felipe, who came in from Braunschweig, good signing. But Yusuf Poulsen was the leader on and off the pitch. He pops up with the winner here, right? And I think that's the thing that I really find impressive about this HSV side is that they have been very good in getting dramatic late-minute winners this year, or equalizers, right? Stuttgart comes to mind, that the Dortmund comes to mind. Now this, they're getting points the way a team that fight relegation should be getting points, and that's by hard work and by believing in themselves until the very end. And that's sort of what I saw in this game, is that this is a HSV side, unlike the one that went down, and unlike the one that spent 7 seasons in the Zweite Bundesliga, topping one failure over another, is finally in a place where they have believed that they can win games or get points in difficult situations. And I think, that's credit to Merlin Poulsen, the head coach, who's installed a new kind of culture at the club, but also Stefan Kunz, the sporting director, who's targeted and signed players that can that can live this work ethic. I think HSV are not going to be the club that's going to get into Europa League or Champions League or whatever, but I don't think they're going to get relegated this year, Stefan. I really don't see it.
No, I don't either. And my newsletter last week was actually on exactly that, and how HSV and Cologne have kind of managed to kind of come into the league and really step things up. And as a result, we've seen a lot of teams shoved to the bottom of the table and consequently have sacked their head coach. Whether that's Augsburg, whether that's Wolfsburg, whether that's Mainz. Those are direct repercussions of the way that HSV and Cologne have kind of came in and kind of very quickly made themselves comfortable on the table. And this was a big win for them. I was at the St. Pauli derby, which was at home to HSV, or HSV were at home, sorry, and there was so much built up about that game. I remember someone from HSV telling me they could have sold tickets to that game 5 times over. So much build up to only for St. Pauli to play them off the pitch and very quickly remind everyone at HSV that the Bundesliga is quite literally a different league. It's a different set of expectations, a different set of qualities, different players, and they'd have to be a lot better. And I think that was a bit of a wake-up call for HSV on the day. And you then kind of fast forward to this game against Werder Bremen, which is also a derby, and it had strong derby vibes as well, for sure. And it looks as though HSV look a lot more comfortable, just doing what they have to do in the Bundesliga to pick up points. It was a great derby. It was a game that really went back and forth so many times, some great goals, for sure. I didn't even think Werder Bremen played particularly poorly, but it's just one of those derby games where it felt like a game that was never going to end in a draw. And obviously HSV kind of took all the points from that one, but I think maybe what's kind of helped HSV is goals from around that team. I remember writing about HSV about a month ago and talking about the problems that they have in attack, and how they've obviously moved on key players who were talisman for them in the Zweite Bundesliga last season. And then they're really kind of falling back on, a back line of maybe Robert Glatzel, who's the kind of aging kind of centre forward, Ransdorf Königsdorfer, who's a kind of young player who they were quite happy to sell in the summer, but then decided to keep last minute. And then it's like, oh, well, actually, he's going to be the future of the club, so we're going to stick him up front and make him take our penalties, even though he's never scored a penalty at senior level. So he ends up missing 1 or 2 already this season. And it felt very rushed. It felt very unorganised. And there were whispers of the old farce that HSV have been in the modern era of a club who struggled to live up to expectations. But, since then, goals have came elsewhere. Lokonga, obviously, Arsenal fans will remember him. It kind of feels like he's finally kind of showing his potential as a player in the Bundesliga. Obviously scored today. I think he's now got 3 goals in the Bundesliga. Vieira, I thought was outstanding. He's really blossoming into a great playmaker for them. And of course, Vuskovic scores a goal as well, which is so important. And I can only echo what you said. Like, the kind of, he's not just a player on loan from Tottenham. He is very much like the stand-in for his brother in this HSV team, you know. And you go to HSV and you'll see the banners for his brother in the stands, and it's something the club, but more importantly, the fan base feel very, very sore and upset about. They don't believe in the ban whatsoever. They think they've been wrong done by. They think Vuskovic has been wrong done by. So for his brother to then come to the club and settle in as an outstanding player, it must be said, he's an outstanding player as well, right? I think he's actually better than Vuskovic Senior, if you will, his brother. But he's kind of settling into that team and, you know, in a way, kind of flying the flag for his brother. So it's obvious that, you know, HSV fans are going to take them very well, and especially when he scores goals in derbies like this. But yeah, it's great for HSV. It kind of helps them kind of climb up the table after they've obviously now got back-to-back wins now. After, I think it was defeat to Augsburg, was it? Yeah. So, you know, they've beaten Stuttgart, they've beaten HSV, they now play Hoffenheim, which would be a really tight game for them. But no, they're doing well, and it's great to see, because, you know, I'd like them to stay in the division for sure. But they're going to have to keep at it, Manu, because those teams that we just spoke about, you know, the Wolfsburgs, the Augsburgs, the Mainzes, the downside to them sacking their head coaches is sometimes they get their act together, you know, and Wolfsburg have now picked up a draw and a win in the last 2 games. Heidenheim have now picked up back-to-back wins. Augsburg picked up a very surprising win over Leverkusen at the weekend there. So all of a sudden, the 5 teams underneath Hamburg or HSV in the table, 4 of them picked up a win or a draw at the weekend there. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is HSV have to keep up certain standards if they want to make sure they can avoid getting dragged into relegation. So all well and good that, you know, they've picked up 15 points from the first 13 games. It's probably doing them well enough, but I think 3 or 4 games without a win, and you can very suddenly find yourselves right down the bottom of that table, and suddenly the alarm bells start going off at HSV, suddenly the chaos starts kicking off, and it's a club that can definitely get in its own head very quickly. So a very important win. Hope it continues. They've got Hoffenheim next week, see if they can pick up a win there. But I think they're going to have to maintain standards, because I think those teams below them the table might start coming for them, and they might have to start looking over their shoulder.
Yeah, and Hoffenheim have been so good this year, right? Despite everything that's going on off the field, it's actually kind of remarkable how good they have been. And that's going to be, I actually think that's going to be a top match to watch. You know, that's going to be one of the games in the upcoming match day, because it's a game of the unexpected. Same with Leverkusen Köln, by the way. I mean, Köln too. It's remarkable where they are. They're 8th in the standings, right? And have done really well thanks to Said El-Mala and his performances. But yeah, HSV, I mean, it's great to have these clubs back. And I read your article with interest this week as well, or last week. And I did some thinking, because you look at the Zweite Bundesliga at the moment, the table there. Schalke look like the team to come up, but Hertha are on a good way as well. And then all of a sudden, maybe Hertha and Schalke come directly up, and you have St. Pauli, Heidenheim, or Mainz, one of those teams go down. That will put even more pressure on teams like Augsburg and Wolfsburg, because Schalke and Hertha come up with the power that they have at the moment, and the young talents that they have in their respective squads, and the financial dynamics that come with that, right? And the television interest and the sponsorship interest in these teams, once they are back in the Bundesliga, will be easily outdrawing the sponsorship interest some of these other teams will receive. And then all of a sudden you have a Bundesliga in which all big clubs are in, and something's got to give, right? And, you know, that is probably going to be an Augsburg, a Mainz, a Wolfsburg. It's an interesting dynamic that we find ourselves into. You're looking over your shoulder. I think your bear dog is ready to do something. He's still muted, probably because of your bear dog. He's still muted, but
Good thing I am muted because I was just explaining the noises I've been hearing in the background. My baby's just woke up from its nap in the next room over,
snoring.
and the dog is she's quite a big dog, which means she doesn't bark. She just makes noises like snorts and grumbles and sneezes to let me know she's not happy, which she's doing right now, because I have to take her out for a walk, which I'll do after the show. But one final thing I wanted to touch on while we're talking about Werder Bremen, actually, because it relates to the show. Early in the season, we were talking about Jens Steer, the Danish midfielder, and I was calling him Jens Stage. And one of our listeners from Denmark got in touch to say, you guys are absolutely butchering his name. It's not Jens Steger or Staga, it's Steer. And then I was like, okay, I appreciate that. And when I was actually in HSV, I was speaking to a Danish journalist about this. I was like, I completely butchered poor Jens Steers, because he was there. We were interviewing the president of Werder Bremen, so he had questions for Jens Steer, and I was like, afterwards, I was like, funny you should mention that, because I got absolutely butchered by some Danish listeners for mispronouncing his name. And he's like, well, apparently it's more common than you think. Now, I can't remember which club this was. I don't know if this was when he was at Copenhagen or when he moved to Werder Bremen, but this Danish journalist told me that when he either joined one of those clubs or agreed to stay with a new contract, they did like a big press event, or they did a kind of big public event and said, it was basically around like the expression, he's centre stage. And then obviously like people back in Denmark were like, that's not, his name's not Stage, it's Steer. So they were saying, so basically this Danish guy's been nice to me. He's like, it happens more often than you think it does. And I guess probably in Germany they'd call it Stager or Steg or something, Stage or something like that.
I stand corrected.
So it's an easy mistake to make. But if our Danish listeners are listening, please bear in mind I am trying to learn. Every day's a school day. So yeah,
I get most Danish names right, but I would have definitely gotten this wrong. If you put a G and an E in there, for German, you pronounce those letters.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I think it was at Copenhagen, because he was saying even at Copenhagen they mispronounced his name, because maybe he's from a part of Denmark where the different accent or something like that. Maybe we can find out. We'll find out in the next episode.
He's from Højbjerg, so not Copenhagen.
Yeah.
The listener can raise his hand and put it in the... Let us know.
He can let us know. I'm sure he will. He was on YouTube, so you guys can jump on there and see.
I do actually appreciate when people say
see what it says.
To be honest, like someone tells us like this is actually not how you pronounce a name. Point taken. I don't take that personally at all.
No, so
please do. All right, I think your dog wants to go for a walk, so we're gonna let you walk the dog, and we'll be back with the Champions League games later this week. I was saying earlier to you, the content and the articles kind of write themselves at this time of the year, so it's easy. Champions League content it is for the rest of the week. So we'll talk to you guys then, and until then, auf Wiedersehen.